Good morning. Dr. Norton here. In nature. Why not? We're looking at Sarah Orne Jewett today, and our protagonist, a young lady named Sylvia, her name could be taken, I suppose, as a symbol for a sylvan. A sylvan is a wooded place, and so that's where I am. I'm in a wooded place today. Just getting into the spirit of regionalism. Again, regionalism is another name that the local color movement would have gone by. We talked about that last time with Bret Hart. Bret Hart really being one of the fathers of this local color movement, of which Mark Twain could be considered a part of. And so, Sarah Orne Jewett, that is our author for today. And here we are out in the wilds of, well, it's not really that wild out here. This is Orange County. This is the Arroyo, kind of near my house. If you look over here, there's an embarrassingly large bridge with an obscene number of cars coming over it, but still, this is the best we could do. Why not? This is the Arroyo. I ride my bike down in there sometimes. Pretty cool. On goes up toward Saddleback Mountain is kind of in the distance there. Can't really see that, but anyway. So, in the spirit of regionalism, here we are out in the wild. So, here we go. 1849 to 1909. That is Sarah Orne Jewett's lifespan. 1849 to 1909. And just a quick review. So, regionalism or local color refers to fiction or poetry that focuses on specific features, including characters, dialects, talked about last time, customs, history, and even topography, the landscape. What is made up of the landscape of a particular region? In the Bret Hart piece we looked at last time, The Luck of Roaring Camp, there were particulars about topography. There's only certain parts of the world where a flooding river would actually cause some serious damage. Here in Ladera Ranch, where I live, and in the Arroyo back in here, not much chance. Not much chance of a river messing up anything, really, around here. But what would it be like to live in a region where the inhabitants were at the mercies of weather? Actually, just yesterday, tragically enough, there was a massive 2-mile wide tornado that swept through parts of Oklahoma. What's that like? I said to my wife, I found myself saying this last night, what would that be like? Knowing, hey, it's tornado season, honey. Have you cleaned out the basement? Because one of those massive, destructive, crazy tornadoes might come whipping through here and pull our house into Oz. Who knows? But what would that be like? And so that was one of the questions that kind of drove the interest in this local color movement. Now today we can go and we can see on TV, we can see the devastation that a tornado does. We can see what it's like for people to live in the swamps of Mississippi, in the Southlands. But back in the 19th century, that wasn't a possibility. And so it was the literature that came out that said, this is what this looks like. This is what this sounds like. This is what this smells like. This is the kind of anxiety that is caused by those who, or that those who live in these particular areas must deal with, the kind of anxiety they deal with, and so forth. So, here we go. So again, this genre is a subfield of American literary studies, traditionally located in the late 19th century. Okay, we talked about that already. Just going through my notes here. The works are set in or near, so Sarah Orne Jewett, she wrote from a regionalism that would be South Berwick, Maine, on the border of New Hampshire, which in her day was a declining New England seaport. All right, so that's kind of the topography we can kind of imagine here is Maine, kind of the wilds of Maine, on the borders of New Hampshire in the mid-19th century. Not a whole lot of development out there, especially where we find our protagonist. Paula Blanchard writes a biography about Sarah Orne Jewett and talks about her life. And she says, Sarah Orne Jewett grew up with hills and waters and a large open country all about her. This wild land she knew and loved well, as her books show. So something about Jewett's biography here that I think it's some interesting things. She was born September 3rd, I mentioned 1849, educated for most of her life at a village school, and then later on at a place called the Berwick Academy, which was a more advanced academy. Her father was a physician, a country physician, and as her biography or her biographers have described, her father was not a big fan of traditional education, kind of ironically because he is a man of great education himself, but when there were very sunny, beautiful days, he would keep Sarah out of school and he would take her on his home visits all across the countryside as a physician. And so much of her life was spent walking through the countryside with her physician, her local town doctor, dad of a doctor of a dad? Wow. Anyway, and walking the country with him and meeting the townspeople all around that he would do house visits for. And so this really was kind of the core of her early childhood education. She believed that the education she received from her father was far more influential than even her traditional school days, learning by watching and talking with her highly educated father. Jewett wrote a book of letters after her father's death, and in one of them she wrote, "Human nature is the same the world over." Now this is a very romantic idea. We talked about romanticism last time. Sarah Orne Jewett would have considered herself influenced by the Romantics heavily. Now, again, this time period, again, she falls into the Romantic era, but again, right on the border there between Romantic and Realism, and so she's being influenced by both parties. But human nature is the same the world over. This is a very romantic sentiment. Provincial and rustic influences must ever produce much the same effects upon character, and town life will ever have in it gift the spirit of the present. Did I read that right? Town life will ever have in its gift the spirit of the present. There we go. While it may take again from the quiet of the hills and fields and the conservatism of country hearts a gift from the spirit of the past. So very much a fan. She was very much a fan of natural learning. And that, again, would be considered a romantic sentiment, romantic thought. So the White Heron, is it realism or is it romance? And why would we call it either one? Well, in some ways we might say it's a realistic text. The text is influenced by realism for these reasons. There's a certain attention to detail that is very realistic in nature in the text. An effort to replicate the true nature of reality. That is something that realism as a movement tried to do. In realism, the novel's function is to report what happens. All right? That's a key attribute of realism. And you should be obviously noting these down in this category in your notes that says, what is realism? Last time we hit romanticism pretty hard. This time, some realism. The novel's function, again, report what happens without comment or judgment. The novel's function is to present seemingly inconsequential elements that gain the attention of the novel functioning in the realistic mode. In modern drama, on the stage, one of the characteristics of modern drama, for the first time, people were answering phones on the stage. This would be a seemingly inconsequential detail of life that would have been left out of your traditional romantic drama. But here in realistic drama, in the realism movement, why wouldn't you show someone answering the phone? Why wouldn't you show someone having to go to the bathroom? Now, you obviously wouldn't show that on stage necessarily, but okay, I can't talk, I gotta go run to the bathroom. This type of staging would happen in a realistic, or a drama in realism. Because these are important, although seemingly inconsequential details of human life that affect human reality. The reader is often given the feeling of being there in the moment in a realistic text. This is created by an emphasis on minute details and observations. Kind of mentioned that already. In realism rests upon the strengths of its characters rather than plot or turn of phrase. Realism rests on the strength of its characters. The character really becomes of foremost importance. In realism, literature is often psychologically complicated. That's an important attribute. They display conflicting impulses and motivations. That's going to be very important as we look at the White Heron. conflicting impulses and motivations. That will also be important as we look at Henry James's The Real Thing. Realism seeks to replicate the daily struggles of being human. So what about the white heron seems to come from the realistic movement? The story does not comment or judge Sylvia's choice or her inner struggle. There's no commentary on that. It lays it bare. We see it. We see her struggle. We see her working through issues. But there's no commentary on it. It doesn't say, Sylvia was a great hero of the sylvan landscape. Sylvia, our sylvan hero. It doesn't say that. A romantic text might be more apt to say something like that, to make a commentary about her judgments. Another realistic element about Sylvia's journey in The White Heron is the fact that Sylvia is our primary focus. She is psychologically conflicted. She is forced to make a difficult but realistic choice. So what about The White Heron seems to come from a romantic background, or what are the romantic elements? Sylvia is on a personal quest. This is very romantic. This is, in some ways, a coming-of-age story. How may it be argued from the elements and details of the story that Sylvia grows from a child into an adult in this story? And from a romantic point of view, that would be a very romantic sentiment. That would be a very romantic theme, that she comes of age, that she moves from child to adult by struggling with the issues that she struggles with in this short story. Sylvia's story might also be considered a loss of innocence tale. A loss of innocence tale. How can we see this story in this light? How might Sylvia have lost her innocence? That's a good question. We might call the elements in the story representative. And this would also be a romantic technique or a romantic element in some ways. That the story is representative. We have a manufacturing town. We have dark woods. We have an affectionate girl. We have a kindly grandmother. A nameless hunter. These are all in some ways kind of archetypal or figures that are representative. The story works with some key symbols, symbolic characters, and symbolic relationships. As we talked about last time, a bell should kind of go off in your head now that you understand some of the key elements of romanticism. Whenever you see this idea of symbols or the symbolic nature of things, boom, romanticism, right? What do these elements in the text symbolize? So let's look at Sylvia's name. I already mentioned this before, but her name is closely associated with the word sylvan, which refers to something closely associated with the woods. Sylvia is a natural girl. She's connected to the wild fields, the forest, and to the animals. Sylvia's character is almost allegorical. But like last time, the Romantics didn't really love the allegory. It was too confining. In an allegory, the character would be named exactly what she is. There's a 1-to-1 ratio. There's not a whole lot of room for interpretation. Otherwise, you might cause some confusion. That would be from the standpoint of an allegory. In an allegory, you want a 1-to-1 relationship between subject and meaning, or name and meaning. If we were to turn this story of the White Heron into an allegory, we would need probably to rename Sylvia something like vulnerable, or impressionable, or White Heart. That'd be kind of cool. Oh, look at that. Tottenham Hotspur. This soccer team plays at a stadium called White Hart Lane. That's a heart. It's a type of animal. But anyway, White Heart. That would actually be pretty cool. I just thought of that. I didn't have that in my notes. I just thought of that just now. That her name, if it was White Heart, would be more of a good allegorical title for her. Sylvia, I don't know. It's just a little too open, right? It's definitely too open for an allegory. The same method works for the boy who comes hunting for the white heron, right? He is called by several different names: ornithologist, handsome stranger, young sportsman, hunter. It is unclear what it is that the young man is all about. It's not made perfectly clear. Thus, that would be a fault if it was an allegory. But this is not an allegory, right? Again, if we interpreted him, if we try to interpret him as a symbolic character, we might ask these questions. Is the hunter symbolic of capitalist greed? That'd be one way to interpret this story, that he is a symbol of capitalist greed. Another way, is he a symbol of industrial development? Is his mindset, is his motivation, is this symbolic of industrial development? Is he a symbol of nature-raping consumerism? I mean, you could go that way with this story. Is he symbolic of human sexuality and desire? I don't know if you thought about that, but that very well could be one way to interpret this story, that the hunter is a symbol of human sexuality and desire. An allegory would not leave us with this many options for interpretation. That's kind of my point by going through it like this. But it also helps us as we look at this thing symbolically. So let's look at these characters. So Sylvia, she can represent human innocence. She can symbolize conflicting human aspirations. She can symbolize newly awakened sexuality. Okay, those are some options. About the hunter. In some ways we have a scientist hunter. He can be symbolic of man's egoism and arrogance with respect to nature as an industrialist. He might also be symbolic of man's egoism and arrogance with respect to women in the 19th century, or in 19th century America. The white heron. This could be an embodiment of an important expression of nature. A white heron. I mean, think about it, right? You have a white heron, it's white, it's pure. Is nature pure? I don't know. I mean, that could be one way to interpret this thing, right? I mentioned last time this movement, naturalism, coming out right about the same time as this text. Naturalism, we'll look at this a little more in 2 weeks with the open boat. But naturalism, the naturalist movement would not see nature as Mother Nature. It would see nature as a violent force, impersonal, and somewhat chaotic, not governed by principles. Well, if you take this text and you see the white heron as a symbol of purity and natural purity, well, that's giving nature somewhat of a personality, right? And so that would be one way to interpret the story, not every way. Is the heron symbolic of innocence and purity? Is the heron symbolic of a world apart from man's dominion? Is the white heron a symbol of sexual purity from a social or communal standpoint? In some ways, the question is asked, is her sexual purity worth giving up? If the heron is a symbol of Sylvia's sexual purity, is it worth for what she'll get? Now, we can look at this a couple different ways, right? If sitting on the ground here, I'm feeling the pain of nature right now. If we look at this in some ways, you could say that for someone who meets their soulmate, someone they dearly love, I would say that would be the person they've saved their sexual purity for. And so in some ways you could see the sacrifice of sexual purity in a very positive way, I guess, in that way. But in other ways, we see the sacrifice of sexual purity to uphold this idea of sexual purity is a romantic ideal. And in this situation, is this hunter, is he worthy of this sacrifice? It's a question that the text seems to ask. Is her social and communal devotion worth sacrificing for personal gain? That's another question that's asked. Is the heron a symbol of Sylvia's social and communal devotion? In this text, it seems that she is devoted in some ways to nature, that she is devoted to the animals. She has to give this up. Is it worth it? Is it worth giving it up, sacrificing communal devotion for this young man, for this hunter? Sylvia has a symbolic relationship with the hunter. Perhaps this relationship is symbolic of the predicament of young women in Jewett's culture. She might represent women in a patriarchal culture. This relationship could be symbolic of a woman's relationship to a man in a patriarchal culture, or a woman's relationship to a patriarchal culture. Women have limited opportunities in a patriarchal culture for economic advancement or any kind of social advancement, and are thus forced to seek destructive alliances with men. Is that what Sylvia's relationship with this hunter is a symbol for? Here's an alternative reading. I stole this from the biographer. What's this guy's name? I'll give her credit because I hate to plagiarize. Paula Blanchard. Paula Blanchard, in her biography of Sarah Jewett, makes a comment about the white heron, and she says this as an alternative reading. Could it be that Sylvia has escaped the oppression of a manufacturing town? That's why she's living here with her grandmother, right? She has gotten free of a great red-faced boy who used to chase and frighten her. We see that in the text, right? That was in where her family used to live. She was chased by this great red-faced boy. And thus, for now, avoided her impoverished mother's fate, a house full of children. Right? She's not in that place anymore. She has begun a life brand new in a rural, essentially maternal world, but soon she longs for another, a greater scope. Having largely mastered her little domain, she wants to see all the world, as the text says. When she meets a cultured young man, the hunter, she imagines transcendence with him. The urging of incipient sexuality furthers this vision. The story makes it evident that her grandmother unwittingly supports the man's interest and thus cannot guide her granddaughter toward other ends. So that's another way of looking at this, right? This hunter may not be seen as all bad. He may be the next stage in Sylvia's development as a woman, the vehicle that will help her get to the next level of transcendence, perhaps. A question for you. What is significant about Sylvia's choice at the end of the story? What does she choose, and what does it mean? That's a question I want you to be thinking about, asking yourself. So let's look at a few passages from the text. Note to students, my back is killing me right now, but we're out in nature, and it's worth it. All right. Gonna have to stretch after this for a while. In the story, here's a passage. You would know the heron if you saw it, the stranger continued eagerly. A queer tail, a queer tall white bird with soft feathers and long thin legs. And it would have a nest perhaps in the top of a high tree, made of sticks, something like a hawk's nest. Sylvia's heart gave a wild beat. She knew that strange white bird, and had once stolen softly near where it stood in some bright green swamp grass, away over at the other side of the woods. There was an open place where the sunshine always seemed strangely yellow and hot, where tall, nodding rushes grew, and her grandmother had warned her that she might sink in the soft, black mud underneath and never be heard of more. Not far beyond were the salt marshes just this side of the sea itself, which Sylvia wondered and dreamed much about, but never had seen, whose great voice could sometimes be heard above the noise of the woods on stormy nights. So here, in some ways, we see a longing and desire. A longing and desire are clearly awakened in Sylvia. Here, what does she desire? Does she desire her own extended adventure beyond the grandmother's imposed limitations? Does she desire the hunter's affection and respect, his reward? She goes on, I can't think of anything I should like so much as to find that heron's nest. This is the young man, right? The handsome stranger was saying, I would give $10 to anybody who could show it to me. He added desperately, and I mean to spend my whole vacation hunting for it if need be. Perhaps it was only migrating or had been chased out of its own region by some bird of prey. And then a little farther down, Sylvia, no amount of thought that night could decide how many wished-for treasures the $10 so lightly spoken of would buy. So here we see Sylvia recognizing the value of money, right? She knows that $10 is no small gift or no small figure. and she is tempted by this monetary reward. Why is she tempted by $10? That's part of the question of the text. It's part of the struggle we must analyze as we look at this. A little farther down, when she goes out with the hunter, right? She takes him out into the woods as his guide. And she says, after the long day of not finding anything, she says, or the text says, she grieved because the longed-for white heron was elusive. Sylvia wants to find the white heron. She wants to help the hunter, at least for part of this deal, right? A little farther down, she gets up early, right? Because her plan is, I think she says, she believes, she gets up early and climbs that big tree. I think I could find that heron. I think from the top of the tree, I will be able to see that heron and then guide the hunter and get my $10. And the hunter's love and affection, his respect, which she seems to value, right? It says this, the tree seemed to lengthen itself out as she went up, and to reach farther and farther upward. It was like a great main mast to the voyaging earth. It must truly have been amazed that morning through all its ponderous frame as it felt this determined spark of human spirit wending its way from higher branch to branch. Who knows how steadily the least twigs held themselves to advantage this light, weak creature on her way. The old pine must have loved his new dependent. More than all the hawks, bats, and moths, and even the sweet-voiced thrushes, was the brave beating heart of the solitary, gray-eyed child. And the tree stood still and frowned away the winds that June morning, while the dawn grew bright in the east. Some interesting stuff here. So the first part is the reaction of the natural world to Sylvia. The influence of romanticism here, right? We have a very maternal nature. The tree helps Sylvia climb. We have nature that's personified. The tree felt this determined spark of human spirit. Does nature love humanity? Does nature love some humans, perhaps? A romantic view of nature, a mother figure. Sylvia is nature's dependent, as the text says. And then an interesting point here that Jewett brings in is this term gray-eyed child. Gray-eyed child. The Greek goddess of wisdom and of military victory is named Athena. And Athena throughout Greek mythology, well, we see this in the Iliad especially. Athena and all her offspring are called gray-eyed. They are called the gray-eyed ones, or Athena as the gray-eyed goddess. How is Sylvia connected to Athena, the goddess of wisdom? That's kind of fascinating, right? And the goddess of military victory. That's also fascinating in a different kind of way. Perhaps that's what's being conflicted in Sylvia right now, right? She wants wisdom to find what she wants to find. She doesn't know to what purpose or what end. Does she desire the wisdom of the white heron to give to the hunter and to thereby claim victory? Does she want to find the white heron and be militarily victorious because she has helped the hunter gain the victory? Or is she like Athena in wisdom, in the fact that perhaps she will not give away the secret of the heron? That she will fight in a militaristic sense, symbolically speaking, on behalf of nature, of the natural world, that is in opposition to the industrial world, the industrial revolution of the 19th century. These are questions to ask. A little farther down, the child gives a long sigh a minute later when a company of shouting catbirds comes also to the tree, and vexed by their fluttering and lawlessness, the solemn heron goes away. She knows his secret now, the wild, light, slender bird that floats and wavers and goes back like an arrow presently to his home in the green world beneath. Then Sylvia, well satisfied, makes her perilous way down again, not daring to look far below the branch she stands on, ready to cry sometimes because her fingers ache and her lamed feet slip, wondering over and over again what the stranger would say to her and what he would think when she told him how to find his way straight to the heron's nest. Here we have more of Sylvia's conflicted journey. And this, again, in a very romantic sense, is the journey of an individual. Sylvia is on an individual quest. She goes up the tree in order to discover the heron. When does her mind change, or does it? When does her heart change, or does it? A little farther down, the murmur of the pine's green branches is in her ears. She remembers how the white heron came flying through the golden air and how they watched the sea and the morning together. And Sylvia cannot speak. She cannot tell the heron's secret and give its life away. Why not? What happened? What is the key moment? Why does she refuse? What does she sacrifice? Or what does she sacrifice the hunter's reward to gain for herself? Perhaps in the final paragraph we see it, where she says, "Were the birds better friends than the hunter might have been? Who can tell?" And right there we see, I think, the influence of realism. That Jewett here, refusing to guide the reader too far. Was this a good sacrifice? I don't know. What would that $10 have done for her? Yeah, in the 19th century, $10 is a lot of money. Well, that's not going to change her life necessarily, but that would definitely offer her some opportunities. Did she miss a golden opportunity by passing up the hunter here? That's a question we're left with at the end. That's a question that Jewett asks us. Were the birds better friends than the hunter might have been? Who can tell? That's the end. Think about those things. See you later.